a battery. What you're seeing is one piece. A Federal Civil War battery would have had 6 guns, each of those pulled by a team of 6 horses. In the Confederate Army, those are generally pulled by 4 horses. They didn't have as many. Okay? Behind each gun was a limber. This was the ammunition chest. Behind those were the caisson, which had 3 more ammunition chests and a spare wheel. If you go visit Cushing's Battery, the monument, everybody sees the guns and limbers. They don't see the caissons that are on the other side of the road, properly placed. They had enough space to allow horses to maneuver, and also so if one exploded, they didn't all explode. What you also don't see are the 100 to 150 men that it took to run a Civil War battery. An equal amount of horses, right? What you don't see here, but you can see if you visit our camp, each Civil War battery traveled with a portable forge. They traveled with a farrier, a carpenter, and a blacksmith. There are about 5 of these forges in the United States. So we have one with us here. So visit camp. Also at camp is a full field hospital. We have a medical wing as part of our group as well. So if you're interested in Civil War medicine. So every position on a battery or on a gun, the individuals were known by their numbers, not by names. Right? If someone is injured or wounded, me telling you to go take over for Joe, you don't know what gun that is or what your job is. But if I tell you you're now number 2 on gun number 1, you know where you're going, you know what equipment you need, and you know what your job is going to be when you get there. So cannoneers were known by numbers, not by name, and that's true in the modern artillery as well. So I'm going to introduce you to the 9 people it took to run one gun. Now the Civil War Field Artillery Manual has procedures to take it down to 2 people if you're taking heavy casualties, but ideally it took 9 people to run this gun. Number 1 is on the front right of the gun. He has a tool called a sponge rammer. One end of that tool is a wet sponge that goes down the barrel to extinguish any embers from the previous round. The other side of that tool is the rammer head. That's what pushes the round down. Almost all Civil War field artillery, there were very few exceptions, were muzzle loading weapons. This gun, a 3-inch ordnance rifle, every round that came out of it sat on a 1-pound powder charge. So we fire about half of that. It still makes a big boom, and it costs about $10 to $15 every time this gun goes off. So we just assumed it not be $20 to $30 every time this gun goes off. Number 2, front of the gun on the left side, has a tool called a worm. That is a giant corkscrew. Its job is to clear any obstructions in the barrel. We use it every time. They used it only if there was something in there that prevented firing the gun again. We're worried about stuff coming out of the end of the barrel. That was the whole point for them. So they weren't too worried about that. Number 3, back on the right-hand side of the gun, has a few different tools. On his thumb is a leather thumb stall. That served 2 purposes. 1, to protect his thumb. These barrels, when repeatedly fired, could get red hot. More importantly than that, it deprives the rear of the gun of oxygen. He will cover the vent to allow no breeze to move through the tube and fan any embers that are in there. He also has a brush to clean out any fouling in the vent and a brass spike called a priming wire. That's what pokes a hole in the powder charge to allow it to fire. It's made out of brass on purpose. Brass is a non-sparking metal. You certainly don't want to introduce a spark into a powder charge except exactly when you want to do that. Number 4 is the one that fires the piece. Number 4 will have a friction primer and a long lanyard. You'll see number 4 step out, and that's when the gun would fire. Number 5 Number 5 is probably standing right by the limber where he should be. In the Army, number 5 was called the powder passer. In the Navy, that position was called the powder monkey. That might be a term you're more familiar with. Number 5's job is to carry the round from the limber to the gunner for inspection and ultimately to the front of the gun to be loaded. You'll notice when number 5 is moving, he is protecting that leather haversack and the round with his body. If number 5 gets shot, well, he's my son and I'm going to have some explaining. But if the round gets shot, you could lose the whole gun crew. So the number 5 would literally protect the round with his body. Number 6 and 7 would work the limber, preparing whatever round that the gunner called for. The 8th person actually gets a name, but not his own name. The 8th position is the gunner. That would generally be a corporal. You'll see 2 stripes on his arm. The corporal is the one who commands the gun operations. The 9th person was called the chief of the piece, typically a sergeant. The sergeant is in overall command of the gun. As a lieutenant, I would command a section, 2 guns. So batteries would have a captain in charge of everything, 4 lieutenants, 1 per each street, 2-gun section, and a 4th lieutenant who is in charge of the caissons, right? Multitudes of sergeants and corporals, 2 buglers, typically. In the artillery, they tended to use the bugle, not the fife and drum. We needed the louder instrument. A lot of times people ask, did cannoneers go deaf? Yes, all of them. So you'll see we had the louder music, but you'll also see some visual commands that I'll explain. So those are the 9 people that ideally run 1 gun. Okay? So that's why with 6 guns and all the other, you would get over 100 soldiers involved. So what we're going to do now is walk you through what's called loading by detail. That would be the drill version. The gun is not going to go off this time. But in loading by detail, they went step by step methodically. This is how we train cannoneers. They're going to do it for you so I can explain to you what they're doing so that next time you see them do it for real, you'll understand what's going on. Sergeant, load by detail.
Cannoneers, load by detail, shell 1,200 yards, load.
So you'll notice the first thing he does is call, the gunner calls what shot he wants. The limber will immediately start to work on that. The limber will also echo the command so that the gunner knows they heard him right. And will also tell the gunner what degree of elevation he needs to fire at and how long the projectile will be in flight. The next command which he's given is 10 vent. You'll see that number 3 has stepped in. That's when he brushes out the vent and then covers the vent. The next command is
wet sponge.
So we've already searched the piece. The wet sponge, they're sending down that wet end to extinguish any ember. Now you'll notice when he finishes, he flips the tool around so he's ready. He'll also tap the barrel and hold it sideways. Remember, we're probably deaf. That's his way of communicating to the gunner that that is a finished job and he's ready for the next step.
Advance the round.
And advance the round. Number 5 is going to bring the pre-made shot ready. You'll see him stop at the gunner. This is the gunner's last chance to inspect the round to make sure he got what he called for. At which point he'll take it forward. Number 2 will take it, bring the round under the barrel to protect it as long as he can, load it into the end. Number 1 will then cover that round with the end of his tool, just an added level of protection. The next command is
ram.
At ram, number 1 will use the rammer side of his tool, push it all the way to the breech. Remember, there's a pound of powder and the charge on top of it. The next command is
Sight the piece.
at sight the piece, the gunner will step forward. Number 3 steps back to the end of that spike on the end called a trail spike. The gunner will hang what's called a pendulum hawse on the back of the gun. That is the rear sight of the gun. With the blade at the end of the barrel, those 2 become your classic open iron sights. He'll know what degree to set it at because the limber told him to do that. He controls the elevation of the barrel using what's called the elevation screw under the breech. He controls the windage, or the left and right, by tapping on the trail, and number 3 uses that hand spike to move the gun left and right till it's in position. When the gunner is satisfied, he will say the piece is sighted. He'll also give the touchdown symbol. That's again a visual signal that the gun is sighted and ready to go. The next command is clear and then ready.
Ready.
At ready, number 3 and 4 step in. Number 3 will use that brass spike to poke a hole in the powder bag. Number 4 will hand him the charge, the primer. Goes in the vent. Number 4 will step out. When everybody, remember, it's not going to go boom this time. When everybody's satisfied, number 4 reports to the gunner that the piece is ready. The gunner will go to prepare, and then the gun would fire. Now, in the first battle of Bull Run, or what's called the first battle of Manassas, the Federal artillery rolled in, shot up all their rounds, and then left, with hours of battle still to go. So the chief of artillery created that song and dance to slow the artillery down. Even given that, a well-trained crew can fire 2 to 3 shots per minute. Okay? All of that. Because they don't go step by step. Now, what did this gun fire? One of 3 things. This is a 3-inch ordnance rifle, which means its bore diameter is 3 inches. It would fire this called solid shot, which is a 10-pound chunk of iron. These were rifled guns, so when that powder charge went off, it would splay out this brass sabot. That engages the rifling, it comes out spinning. This would be generally used against buildings. The most common shot was either called shell or case. This is an exploding round that ideally explodes in the air just in front of the Confederate line, so it rains down shrapnel. Inside of it would be an explosive charge of black powder resin, and they would cut a paper fuse that when the main charge explodes, it ignites that fuse, so it's spinning through the air, blowing on that ember, timed perfectly, it explodes in the air. Shell is just that. It's a hollow shell, so the shell of the round becomes shrapnel. Case is exactly the same thing, except they filled it with lead and iron balls just to make that much more shrapnel. Probably the ugliest round this fired was what was called canister. Now we still use canister, except we call it by its nickname of can, and we put soup in it instead of weaponry. So just think of a can of soup. It's a real thin sheet metal can, but this happens to be filled with multitudes of lead or iron balls. So when that pound of powder would go off, this can would rip apart, and it essentially turns this gun into a giant shotgun. It is an ugly, ugly round. It literally rips people apart. So this would be used at close range. What do I mean by that? 300 to 500 yards. So think of a football field. They would switch to canister. And if they got even closer, they would switch to double canister, 1 pound of powder, but 2 cans. So these are the 3 types of rounds that Civil War cannons would fire. And even if it was one of the smoothbore, one of the green guns you see here, same idea, except they truly fired cannonballs. But they had solid exploding and canister. So what we're going to do here is fire for real again, but they are not going to go by detail. They're just going to fire the gun. You can see how much faster it goes, but now you know what they're doing at each step. So